What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. Each Pokemon region has its own unique flavors in terms of the environments that you're able to traverse, and it's a joy to observe how they all fit together. I've already studied the Paldea map in excruciating detail to glean its secrets, but sometimes certain places don't fit quite as well. This can be certain out-of-place biomes, but namely I'm thinking of cities. There are plenty of great cities and towns across the Pokemon series that you love to revisit time and again, but there are other towns that are a chore or just make you bored. So let's take a look at the top 6 worst cities and towns in Pokemon. Number 6, Kumarine City, or however you say it. So what exactly makes a bad city or town can vary depending on who you talk to, but I think this spot in Kalos would qualify for most anyone out there. Probably because you barely remember it, but you come here after Chaleur City, which had a really fun gym that utilized the new skating gimmick, and the Tower of Mastery that gave you Mega Evolution, as well as a free Lucario that could do so. So it's forgivable if you overlook the bland city to follow. When you come to Kumarine City, it's basically a port of some kind, with lots of waterfront property and even a line of boats. So is there anything else that they have to offer? Well, despite the feel of a marketplace, there is really very little in the way of shopping, just buying all of the different kinds of incense. But really, there's no reason that couldn't have been a shop in the corner of Lumio City somewhere. There is that quiz person, I suppose, but what makes it bad is that it's only half of the town. You have to take a train up a cliff to reach the other half. Who thought this was a good idea? It would have been one thing if the town slowly meandered up the mountain and you saw almost cliff dwellings along the way, but these might as well be two separate towns, because they share nothing in common. It's honestly faster to fly to Chaleur and walk over than to take the tram back down to the other section. It was maybe a neat idea, but the execution was not there on the first game for the 3DS. It could maybe have been one okay town, but to split it in half leaves you with 2 nothings. The grass-type gym doesn't even help because it doesn't match the seaside or the mountaintop variations, so what's the point? There are other smaller towns in Kalos that don't even have gyms that have 10 times the character of Kumarine City, so your best bet is just to rush through and never bother going back. Number 5, Verbank City. In Black and White 2, we actually started in a different town, getting to drink in the lovely rustic living of these fine people, even going to a nearby ranch surrounded by lush forests and gorgeous flowing water. And then somehow you immediately wander into the worst, most disgusting, filthy metropolitan downtown you could imagine. There's literally grease puddles staining the streets. You don't really find that anywhere else. I get that maybe they wanted to capture the inner city feel of squalor, but wouldn't Castelia have been a better place for that? I suppose they just wanted it to match the new poison-type gym that's basically down in the sewers, but it just does not jive with the outdoor areas around it. The nature just outside of this city is completely untouched by the massive amount of pollution they would inevitably pump out. And even the industrial sector in the south does have grass with Pokemon currently living in it. So are the people really just that gross? Also, the dilapidated state of the city does not match the Pokestar Studios either. That area is a gleaming representation of Unova culture, the seat of entertainment on par with the Pokemon World Tournament. It's a nice sanitary environment, so you're telling me that those people who have at least some self-respect wouldn't invest in the community just on the other side of the wall? Now maybe you would say, of course not. It was meant to be that way and was a scathing indictment of corporate greed and how they harm nearby commoners. But that never came across in any of the dialogue or anything, so I think the people of Verbank are just that nasty. Personally, I hate the Pokestar Studios because you're forced into that side quest, unlike say the musicals, making me stay in the Verbank area for far too long. And again, maybe they made it awful on purpose like a real city, but it came a little late in the sequel version. Your point would have been far more salient in the start of the generation. But luckily, after you do your time here in this grimy concrete cube, basically being a prison, you never have to come back. Which seems to be a theme with some of these worst towns, so maybe the folks in charge knew that, but if that were the case, you would think they would just design a more pleasant place to be. Number 4, Tapu Village. The Alola region is pretty unique in terms of its culture, and many of the cities are able to reflect that. But when you hear the name Tapu Village, you would probably imagine an extravagant celebration of the Island Guardians, right? Well, instead, we get a wide spot on the road to nowhere. Okay, you do come back here to climb the mountain to the Pokemon League, but apparently this used to be a town that was destroyed when they angered the Tapus. But this is where I get confused. From the looks of the destruction, it must have happened a long time ago, but then you walk a few feet and find a supermarket. Sure, it's run down, but it's not in full ruins like some ancient civilization. Now, you might be saying that this is dumb and not even a real city, so it shouldn't count. But the thing is that it should have been a real city. If you look at the map of Ula Ula Island, by far the biggest island, by the way, there are really only 2 cities, when much smaller islands have as many or more. And furthermore, as fun as it is to have Po-Town adding a little flair to the game and the island in general, the logistics of its existence do not add up. The whole thing is walled off and there are no ports, so how do they even get supplies? I highly doubt that they are shipped all the way from Mali City, so having a town halfway between the two would make it feel a lot more realistic. They could have just moved over that ramshackle collection of trailers right beside Tapu Village on Route 13 at the oasis outside the desert. Now let's be real, I probably still would have picked on them for that too, but if they had at least tried to consolidate all of these widespread buildings under the banner of Tapu Village, it would have made a lot more sense for the biggest island in the region. And change it so that the Ether House isn't in the middle of nowhere for no good reason. Number 3. Blackthorne City. This one might sound strange to include because it's one of the major ending cities to cap off the region, but since that's the case, it should really start acting like one. I mean, if you look at Sunny Shore or Opelucid City, these are grand locations that really make you feel like you've reached somewhere significant as a sort of culmination to your journey. But, Blackthorne doesn't really get that across. Oh, there is the Dragon's Den, sure, and that is definitely a nice touch, but the rest of the town is just kind of nothing. It's barely bigger than the tiny Mahogany Town that we just went through, but the official map claims that it's somehow as big as Ecruteak or even Violet City. Even the more natural beta version would have been better than what we got. And in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, it appears even worse, since Blackthorne looks completely barren. It's all dirt and rocks, with only 2 hollowed out trees as its only vegetation. This is worse off than the old West Town in the Unova region. How are the ancient structures inside a damp cave in better condition than the rest of the modern city? I get that the Dragon's Den is significant to these people, but attempting to build a haphazard town around it up in the mountains was clearly more than they were able to take on. And plainly, as a special final town, it really falls short of the grandeur that you would expect. Maybe that's because they knew the entire Kanto region was still to come, but that just makes Johto feel even less special. So if we ever do get to see it again, can we please make it actually worthy of housing a final Dragon Gym? Number 2. Postwick. Honestly, this list could almost be entirely comprised of hometowns across the years, since they are usually tiny and insignificant. I mean, even the professor started moving out at some point. But the Galar region took things to a whole new level. I realize that towns in England can be quite close, so I'm not saying that Wedgehurst is out of place. No, my problem is the fact that Postwick is not even a town. It's literally 2 houses. How is that a town? You and your rival's family. That's it. There is plenty of farmland around, but again, does that make it a fully incorporated town? Now, is it just because Leon is the champion that this pair of houses gets a special status? Does that change when the player stops being the champion after? I could almost see that making sense, except for the fact that Professor Magnolia, an arguably more important figure, lives even further away from town yet still doesn't get her own designation. Look, I don't mind suburbs existing in Pokémon, but a solitary pair of houses does not a suburb make. So what's really going on here? I mean, is the daycare in the wild area its own town now too? Maybe a wild area town wouldn't actually be such a bad idea after all. Number 1. Duford Town. For the most part, Hoenn has a pretty good track record for enjoyable and unique cities. Entries such as Fall Arbor, Pacifitlog, Fortree, and Setopolis are defining features of the region. Even more standard towns like Lily Cove or Rustboro still have a certain charm. So it's a shame that the Hoenn region was stuck with such a blemish as Duford Town. Duford has a number of problems, not the least of which being a total lack of a mart. So I hope these people like fish because that's about all they're going to be eating. The biggest thing of note in this entire town, well, I guess it's the gym, but outside of that, the only thing they have is the guy that gives you the trendy saying. Ooh, I'm glad I took the long boat ride here now. There is a nearby cave for you to explore, but you can't really do much of anything until you get some HMs like Flash, which does thematically connect back to the gym, so I guess that's some nice continuity. But that's it for Duford. It has nothing to offer the player except to take up time until you get on with the rest of the game. And they had to know this because they tucked it away in a spot that you never need to return to ever, having to surf 2 whole routes on either side just to get there, when the eastern half of the map is clearly the main water portion, so nobody's going to bother tackling that gauntlet just to learn the new trendy saying. The thing is, this idea could maybe have actually worked, but they just put it in the wrong place. As it is, Duford is nowhere, and is only a spot to do some chores before they take you onto Slateport. But it could have actually served a vital function in the region if it were simply moved up to the north. Unless I'm just totally blanking, there is no way to go from Rustboro up to the Meteor Falls area. It's just a massive cutoff that you have to fly back to. But imagine instead if Duford were here. You would still arrive to the town by boat, but once you obtained surf, you could actually move back up as long as they connected the small waterway to the aqua-filled top of Route 114, and then boom! You have an actual path with a reasonable story explanation for why you couldn't have gone there yet. Just like Hoenn already does on Route 103 and Route 118. So it would have fit completely instead of being the most out-of-place location in the entire region. You wouldn't need to change anything else. You could get the parts to deliver to Slateport just like before, and still have a narrative reason for Mr. Briny taking you back around the bend the way he always did, just without Duford blocking you along the way. If you really need something down in the corner, then they could just put a much greater emphasis on the Regice Cave, since it is quite easy to miss, or maybe that's just where Smallville could have drifted after all this time. It would be totally passable for voluntary exploration, but when you drag me down that far away from civilization only to show me nothing noteworthy, it makes for a fairly questionable spot for a town. As it is, Duford is trying its hardest to rip off Cyanwood from Johto. From the location on the map down to the lack of a Pokemart and even the fighting type gym. So if they had simply shifted it all up a little bit further on the map, they could have actually given Duford a real purpose in the game. Because as of right now, its biggest claim to fame is letting you fish up Pokemon from 3 different spots in a Nuzlocke, but that's only really helpful in a randomizer, so not exactly something the original devs had in mind. So those are some of the worst cities and towns in Pokemon. Again, what makes a town bad can vary quite a bit, so let me know which cities are your least favorite down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.